you wish to speak. And if you're silent during those occasions, that'll be taken as assent. So thanks very much for this. Hopefully we can get out. Hopefully this is the last one. So we'll move to item 1, which is apologies, and there's an apology from Tane Apanui. He's away on family business. So could someone move that?
There's also an apology from Mike Davidson for lateness and partial absence. So he'll be late, and he's got some questions for item 6.4.
I'm happy to move those apologies. Sam.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sam. All those in favour?
Aye.
Right. Yeah, conflicts of interest. I haven't been made aware of any conflicts of interest. And then under the next thing on the agenda is general business. And I know, Dan, that you've got something for general business.
Yes, I do. Do you want me to raise it now, or should I just signal that I'd like to raise it under general business? It's to do with a variation to the RTC for proposed safety improvements to Flaxton Road and Fernside Road intersection. So that's what I'd like to raise. Is that all right?
Yeah, that'll do, Dan. Thank you for that. So, Bevo, if you could just make us aware of that when we come to general business, if I forget.
Yes.
There are no deputations and petitions. So we'll move to item 4 and 5, which is the minutes, and they have been circulated to members. Would a member like to move that the minutes held at the meeting circulated to be confirmed as true and accurate? Someone would like to do that?
Happy to do that.
I'll do that.
Thanks, Graham. Seconded, Craig. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any changes or amendments to be made? I take that there aren't. Therefore, I put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Have a mover and a seconder. Sorry, we've got a mover.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sam. Seconder, Craig. All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against? Carried. Now, moving to reports, we've got 6. And under number 6, we've got reports. There are 7 reports on the agenda. There are 3 reports: Kaikoura variation to NLTP, which is one of the last ones, and scorecard development update, and the Regional Road Safety Working Group Transport Officers Group update. When we get to those, we'll take them as read as being part of this, but I wouldn't mind just talking to the Kaikoura variation to the NLTP, just an explanation around that, and possibly either Ben or Hamish will give us that going forward. There are the first report that we come to, there's the Regional Land Transport Plan update. Then we have COVID recovery, and the last 2 Arataki Transport Agency investment proposal and the Wakakatari NZTA update. I figure we're going to take our most time over those 2, so we'll just see where we get to, but I want to allow enough time to have a reasonable talk about those things. So, Regional Land Transport update. So we made good progress on developing the RLTP today. As noted in the report, there was an excellent discussion at the workshop last Friday where thank you very much for your input into that. And it was really good to have the Transport Officers Group there also. And we concentrated on the vision and objectives for the RLTP. And strategic. Bloody phone's going, sorry about that. So if I would like to invite Hamish to speak to this item, please. Hamish Slack.
Thanks, Peter. So it's like Peter said. So the purpose here really is to reflect on the progress that we've made to date as an RTC on the development of the RLTP. So like Peter mentioned, we've got the vision statement and the strategic objectives, noting that the version of the strategic objectives that are in the paper in front of you doesn't include the slight variation to the final bullet point regarding resilience that was discussed at the workshop, because this was circulated before the workshop. And also there was the result of the workshop itself in terms of developing the investment priorities or the strategic responses. And so I thought that was a really good conversation. I think we made a lot of progress, or you made a lot of progress. And this really was just an opportunity, if there are any other comments or reflections that you had on that conversation, because what we'll do from here is we as staff will go away and together with the TOG continue to develop the strategic part of the RLTP. But what would be really helpful for us is to get an indication of, are we heading in the right direction? Any thoughts or concerns with the progress that we've made to date, just so that we can take that on board as we continue our work.
So do we have any comment on that? I can't see any chat. No. Any hands up? Okay.
So I've just got a few questions. Sorry, I can't quite just joined in. Sorry.
Hi, Mike.
Peter. I just got a couple of questions on the LTP and I guess where we're up to. And apologies for being late, and obviously I can only stay for this one item because of a council meeting at the moment. I guess this is obviously quite a long process we're going to be going through as we develop this, and then our next meeting is in August. And I'm just sort of curious about what is the decisions that we will be looking to make at the August RTC meeting in relation to the RLTP.
So can I get Hamish or Ben to answer that, please, in terms of where they hope to be?
Yeah, it is. I guess we're looking at sort of around the prioritisation framework and when that's going to be developed as well.
Thanks, Mike. If I can try answer your question. So we would like to be in August is to present you like a fairly well worked up strategic portion of the RLTP. So that's the strategic context and the strategic framework. That it doesn't have to be formally agreed at that point, because that can come in December when it's released for consultation. But sort of like an agreement in principle that this is what members want to see, and that we will then just be focusing on sort of refining the words and tweaking things rather than making substantive actions. So ideally, that's what we'd like to achieve in August, to get that sort of broad comfort with things, and that we won't be making substantive changes.
So Mike, it's Peter, and welcome to Craig Mackle. Welcome, Craig. So Mike, have you got some concerns around where we're at with that at this stage, or do you just want to have another opportunity to interact with staff in terms of the development of this? Where you come from on this?
Yeah, it's just making sure that we have a clear understanding, I guess, around the time frames and decision making. Obviously, like NZTA and CCC have a lot of projects in the plan, and it's just, I guess, working out how the prioritisation process is going to happen and timing around that too.
I can speak to the prioritisation process, Councillor Davidson. So basically, we're working with the Transport Special Interest Group around a consistent way of prioritisation. And so at the next TOG meeting, ECAN staff will be working with TOG to formulate a methodology for prioritisation that will come to the RTC in August for feedback on, I guess, your thoughts on it.
So can I just add on to that, Ben? Then I think what we need to do is we need to put a flag somewhere towards the end of maybe June, mid-July, just to get back to Mike informally to find out, and possibly Jim too, to find out if we're on the right track here. Are you happy, Jim? No,
that's fine. I mean, essentially, there was a high-level draft at our last meeting of the front end, and the front end is where this committee is setting out what you see as the issues that are driving transport needs in the Canterbury region. The freight issues, the tourism issues, the safety for the cities in particular, the shift to alternative modes, i.e. more walking, cycling, public transport, the impact of climate change, all those sort of bigger picture issues that we've talked about. So that's kind of like the strategic front end of the issues. Then ultimately the programs and the projects that are put forward by each of the local authorities, NZTA, that gets prioritised using a framework which should talk to NZTA's one, but it doesn't have to be NZTA's one. And then that package ultimately is the draft regional transport plan for submission to the public comment, and then away it goes. So this is very much the front end, which will drive potentially where you put the emphasis in on those program and projects when they come later on. But having said that, probably like your own annual plan budgets, 2/3, 3/4 of it's already spoken for in the sense of maintaining what we've got. You've got networks that need fixing. We have roads that need fixing and normal scheduled replacement of bits and pieces. So, yeah, it's really the new capital and those priorities link back to the strategic front end that we've got to get right ultimately, and it needs to reflect what you think is the right pitch going forward for Canterbury out of that National Land Transport Fund.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Listen, I think how we'll handle this is that we'll just keep in touch with us, Ben and Hamish and Catherine, in terms of the conversations with the transport officers groups going forward who are doing like the heavy lifting here. And we'll get some sense of where we're at by that point, maybe the end of June, sort of early July. And then we possibly need to check back that we're still on the right track. We just don't want to have a big crash when we come to August, I don't think, anyway.
Yeah, no.
Has anybody got a comment?
Yeah.
Anybody
Sorry, I just got one other thing I wanted to raise, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Peter. It was just around the visions and objectives, and I was just hoping with the agreement of the RTC, the objective of a transport network with options that facilitate reliable and consistent journey times, just have one extra word added to that and change it to a transport network with sustainable options that facilitate reliable and consistent journey times.
There's the vision.
So I'm hopeless in this area. So has anyone else got an opinion on that?
So you're wanting to take fit for purpose out, is that correct?
Sorry, I missed your comment. I just want to add the word sustainable into that objective to make it sustainable options.
Okay, so just adding sustainable, yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
Anybody got an issue with that?
I'm fine with it.
Maybe that some options aren't sustainable in the sense of, I mean, as we sit here today, we know in 100 years' time, fossil fuels, if they're not replaced, we're not running around in vehicles. So it's it's an aspiration. It is an objective to try and have a transport system that's sustainable. I mean, there's no question about that. So.
Anybody else?
Yeah, are we just playing with words, going round and round circles with it, or should we just agree with what we had, which we had the other day, and move on with it?
Well, we've got sustainable transport choices below that with reduced negative impacts. So I guess if you put those two objectives together, we're obliged to design the Canterbury network in a sustainable way and ensure that you don't have to rely on a private car for your journey. Well, that's how I interpret it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, can I just add a comment? Look, I don't mean to throw a spinner in the works either, but look, I think we've really well canvassed this, and I just don't really want to be going over wording again with this. No disrespect, Mike, I know you raised a fair point, but we've had a lot of conversation and we've landed where we felt was about right in this terminology. I'm not going to die in the ditch, but I do think, you know, we could be here forever changing words otherwise, and it seems to have most things in there that we've all talked of. So from our perspective, by Makariri's perspective, we were comfortable with where the wording was at.
So I understand it, and obviously I was just trying to get an agreement with the committee. That was the one sticking point I had, was with that objective. I just thought it created potential to actually sort of go backwards slightly and create network capacity where we don't want to create it, and actually by just adding the word sustainable, we're showing that actually we're trying to aim for a sustainable network. It's about reducing roads, you know, in the rural area, it's just about actually looking at the network as a whole. But look, I just wanted to put it forward. It was just one word. And I just thought it, to me, made it just more in line, I guess, with the GPS as well.
Cool, thanks, Mike. Thanks for that. Look, I think we'll leave it where it is at the moment, without putting sustainable in there. And when we go to the consultation process, I guess we get enough pushback in terms of that stuff. We can rethink the whole thing. Really, is everyone happy? Are you happy with that?
Yes.
Oh, look,
Yeah,
it is
we've
what
got,
it is.
and we've got the word sustainable in the vision, which then, and the objectives are really to try and enact, you know, different pieces of the vision. So I hear what you're saying, Mike, around sustainable, but equally they could be, that word could be included in any of the particular objectives, because that is something that I think we all agree is key, and that's why it's in the vision. Provide all transport users with sustainable. That's right there at the start.
And I think, not to labour it, but reliable and consistent journey times doesn't mean to say that you're making them quicker. So you can design your network so that it takes you 20 minutes instead of, but it's a reliable 20 minutes. And the pressure on us is to design the network so there is that consistency, but we're also trying to accommodate the sustainability and the resilience in the face of climate change. So when you put all that together, we have to have a network design which facilitates all those things.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just seen in the past we sort of had that terminology and it ends up in big motorways that end up in the centre of Christchurch. So that's my only concern, is about where the traffic ends up. But that's fine.
I think we can safely say that those motorways were planned in the 60s and they're only just being built now, that's not going to be an issue.
Hey, thank you for the debate, and there's some really good reasoning around some of this stuff. So thank you very much for that. Look, I think we'll draw a line under this one and go to the recommendation on page 16. And the recommendation is that the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee, 1, notes the progress to date on the 2021 RLTP, including the work identifying investment priorities, and 2, agrees to proceeding with the development of the RLTP based on the strategic framework developed at the 27th of February RTC workshop session and subsequent email discussion. So if I got a mover for that, please.
Happy to move that, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. And Dan can second it. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Aye. Carried. Now we've got an item. So if we move to item 6.2, it's about COVID-19 recovery. And again, you know, it's a once in a century thing that's been said many times. And could note that the Minister of Finance has a lot of shovel ready stuff he's looking at. And I think, Graham, you've already identified that some of that's happening in your region in terms of the wildings. So some of that stuff's underway anyway. But this is an opportunity for members to comment on the shovel ready projects submitted for their districts, potential any other transport related recovery opportunities, and how members can work together as an RTC to collectively advocate for stimulus of projects for Canterbury. So, Hamish, would you like to start this off, please?
Thanks, Peter. I don't have much more to say other than, you know, I think you've said it very well. You know, I guess the only other thing to add is in the budget, the biggest spending is spending that hasn't happened yet. So the Minister of Finance announced this $50 billion COVID fund, of which I think only about $10 billion have been allocated. So that there's a lot of sort of money out there looking for ways to stimulate the economy, and so this seems just like a natural opportunity to reflect on what we can do for Canterbury.
And the point I think that was made in the paper is that there's of those shovel ready things for Canterbury, they add up to about 253 million. So do they satisfy the mayors, I guess, and the city? Obviously they do.
Neil, we heard today our project has made a second cut. It was our administration, civic building and library. It made a second cut. So.
I see Craig wants to say something. Craig.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, we just heard today that the $10.5 million worth of projects that we applied for have been denied. So we've got nothing in the pipeline now.
Yeah, our Selwyn project was one roading project. I think it was supposed to be 13, not 12 million, as noted in the paper. But yeah, we heard last week that will probably just get shoved to the Provincial Growth Fund because it was sort of fitted criteria, but was under 20 million was the reasoning given to us. We haven't heard a definitive yes or no, so really keen that it be a yes, but Provincial Growth Fund has not been kind to Selwyn or anyone near Christchurch. So that's as we were at with that.
Look, I'm sorry I dropped out. South Canterbury for you, unreliable. Sorry about that. So I missed what Craig was saying. So Craig, have you had some success? Graham's obviously had some also.
Yeah, no, ours has been denied, Peter.
Oh, it's been denied.
Yep.
Here we are. Here we are. Look, I don't know. I don't know if there's much point in continuing on from here with this. We can use our time on Steve and Jim, actually. So if you're happy, if everyone's happy, I'll move on and just move to the recommendation on this issue on page 19 that the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee discuss transport-related economic recovery opportunities for the Canterbury region. And as some of the stuff hasn't emerged, I guess that may be a bit premature, but do I have a mover for that? Graham Smith, thank you. And a seconder. Craig Rowley, thank you very much. All those in favour?
Could the recommendation, sorry, before you put it to the vote, could the recommendation please just be that we note the appendix in the report, because we didn't really discuss the economic opportunities or anything around it, but it's good to get the report and just see what's on it. And if so, the recommendation that you just moved in second was that we note the report rather than that we discussed anything particular about it.
Are you happy, Vivo, that we can do that after the fact?
Yeah, good.
Yes, yep, that's fine.
Thank you. Let's note that. Sorry that I rushed on, Sam. Yes, I see Mari's got a question.
Not so much a question, but a comment before you put the motion. It just seems really frustrating to me that a lot of time and energy from officers and councils are put in place to put these proposals in front of government ministers, and to be just pulled out and rejected. It's really demoralising, and I just think it would be really helpful to understand how productive it is. We put all these options there, but just to have it taken nowhere at a stroke of a pen, it just seems counterproductive to good democracy or good information sharing across our 10 TAs. And I just find it really distressing. We're in a really vulnerable time, and we're putting up value-added projects to be taken out at a whim. So I just feel really frustrated by that process. So it's a comment, I guess, more than anything else.
That's well noted, Murray, but I'm just wondering, Sam, since this is a mayoral thing in terms of the recovery and they did most of the work, do you think that getting some reply in terms of this or making that point, maybe the mayoral forum's a better option than us?
Yeah, and we will be doing that through the mayoral forum. I totally agree with what Murray has said, particularly when it was asking staff to work full-time over Easter to do this and the public holiday in the middle of a COVID emergency. So agree, and we'll follow that up with the mayoral forum, Murray, tomorrow.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for raising that, Murray. That's pretty valid. Okay, so I'll put that motion then with those adjustments. That all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against? Aye. All those against, carried. So we're cracking on pretty good here. So we've got a bit of time that we can spend on 6.3 and 6.4. And 6.3 is the Arataki Transport Agency investment proposal. A presentation was requested at the previous RTC meeting. And so I would invite Steve Higgs. You're in the room, Steve. Steve Higgs, to speak to this item, please.
Oh, thank you very much. Is it okay perhaps if I share my screen?
Absolutely.
I'll see if this works. Hopefully it does.
Mark, you might have to turn your microphone off, could you? Mark Miller. Thank you.
How's that look?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Steve,
brilliant.
thank you.
Okay. I'll just perhaps just open it up by saying that what I've done with this presentation is not so much focused on Arataki or the tape, but I've tried to put the Arataki and the tape in a strategic context in terms of where it fits within Canterbury and how that fits within the national planning, transport planning, funding and strategy. So I hope that's okay. I have got one slide on Arataki and more than happy to spend a bit more time on that if you wish. But I thought what might be useful would be just to sort of take you through a journey about how we've sort of developed our thinking for Canterbury and how that's now translating into the next regional land transport plan. Jim, were you going to take us through the first few slides, or did you want me to do that?
I could just do a bit of an introduction on a couple of them. The world that we're all living in is part of a broader transport system. The Ministry of Transport, who's the policy agency for the Minister of Transport, has these transport outcomes. So these apply to the maritime industry, aviation, land transport, which is where we fit. And if you look at them, they're not actually that far away from the wellbeing framework that you folk use for your own work. So you've got inclusive access, which is providing opportunities for people to enter the system, which is, ensuring there's driver licensing and all those kind of things. That when people are in the transport system, they shouldn't be subject to detriments to their health and their safety, which is got air pollution issues on it, it's got safe vehicles in it, and it's ensuring that the driver training and the licensing of pilots and all those things are such that none of us are subject to unreasonable health and safety risk. The environmental sustainability objectives are also there, or the outcomes. The government is committed to transiting to a net zero carbon emission economy in the future and maintaining the biodiversity of our landscape that we all live in. So if you think about that in a transport sense, there's direct air pollution from vehicles themselves, there's runoff into the waterways from brake dust and those pollution out of the tailpipe. So, there are some issues in there for all of us, but we can't control them all, obviously, at the regional level. And then there's the resilience and security side, and crucially, post-COVID, is ensuring that our transport system encourages and supports economic development and activity. So that's the sort of the outcomes that we seek. So that's the sort of highest nesting of the transport system thinking. Have you got anything to add on that one, Steve?
No, I think you've covered it. So I guess at the highest level, what the Ministry of Transport and increasingly NZTA is looking to do is to try and put transport into a more enduring framework rather than sort of working from a GPS to a GPS. And with the last one, for example, where we sort of had to turn on and turn off projects. So if we're looking long term, we should be thinking more in terms of a space of a program of interventions or a program of effort that is needed over a period of time. And obviously, depending on the type of priorities that the government of the day is actually looking for, we can then start thinking strategically about how we turn levers on and levers off. So a framework such as what the Ministry of Transport has put together is actually quite a useful starting point. And if we then move down to the next step, which of course is the government policy statement. Of course, we're going through a review of the policy statement at the moment, and that occurs every 3 years. The policy statement is very much a shorter term focus and it is really geared around specific direction from the government of the day in terms of where it actually wants to invest invest in the transport network. This one that's coming up, the draft priority areas are around safety, around access, around travel options, so including travel mode shift, and also freight. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's fine. It's the next one that brings something together. So with this one here, you've got a system where at the top there in the yellow, the government policy statement that Steve's just talked about, that's critically important because this is the way that the Minister of Transport on behalf of the government of the day has a direction setting role. And linked to that direction setting role are those strategic priorities which can come and go. But there's also mandated activity classes, which are like the activities you have in your own annual planning process. Now that's where the government through the GPS can say how much money is available for investment in local road maintenance, local road improvements, public transport, Kiwi Rail now, walking and cycling, state highway maintenance and so on. So the amount of money in each of those tranches or activities, that's set in the GPS. So if there's not enough in there as far as you're concerned, then when the draft is sort of closed for submission. So, we will see what the government decides to do. But the NZTA board ultimately, at the bottom of that diagram, has to settle on a national land transport program. So that has to balance the books based on the revenue and the amount of money that we can play with in each of those activity classes. But crucially, if a program or a project is not in the regional land transport plan, that green box, which is what we're here today to deal with to some extent, then it's not eligible for funding through that system. So that's quite significant, and that includes the Transport Agency's own investment proposal that comes to this table just as the bid from Christchurch City, Mackenzie and Hiranui, etc. So that's very unusual in a national sense. But that means that strategic front end that we were talking about earlier, the objectives, if they're totally different to the GPS, we're in trouble. But they're not, as it happens, so that's good. But ultimately, through that investment prioritisation process, as a committee, we need to be assured that we're putting the best bid forward or picture forward for the greater Christchurch and the Canterbury region. From an agency point of view, we must give effect to the GPS, so that's quite a tight test on us. And all the projects and programs go through an investment framework to assess them.
So just reflecting on some of the issues that Councillor Davidson raised just a wee while ago. So I don't know whether you can see the mouse, but the critical part is actually the green box and the blue box, the coming together of the two. So the Transport Agency's investment proposal, or the TAPE, that essentially is a fair chunk of the Regional Land Transport program, and of course the other part of the Regional Transport program is the local projects and programs, and together they actually form the regional program for Canterbury. So it is actually quite an important time for us at the moment where we understand the priority and the direction that we've been talking about at the strategic level. And then in the next few years, as Hamish alluded to, we need to then work through about how, when these projects actually and the programs actually come together, how are we going to go through a prioritisation process so we end up with a balanced program that actually reflects back on the objectives and the strategic direction that we've been talking about. So this is my one slide on Arataki, and I'm happy to go into more detail if we need to do that. Arataki essentially is really the coming together of what I've just been talking about earlier, and also the work that we have been doing previously. In the next few slides, I'll actually go through some of the previous work that you'll see how we sort of built this from bottom up as well as from top down. Arataki is a translation in some respects of the outcomes the Ministry of Transport outcomes, and I guess it's a process for NZTA to really try and be clear about where it sees opportunities within the national network, and where it sort of sees the direction, which is sort of based on the evidence that it actually holds. It actually works both ways. So it's not just NZTA and applying a national lens over the top. It's also trying to really understand what's happening locally as well, and making sure that the local lens is also equally applied to it too, which is why we have been spending quite a bit of time engaging with you over the last few months, and we will continue to do that. And it's also what we would like to think is going to be a living document. So in other words, we've come out once, we've provided an early version which was provided late last year. We've updated that version to, that's been based on feedback that we've received. We're currently in the process of actually having another look at it again in with a sort of a COVID lens over it, and what does that actually mean for us. And we're going to be looking at it again in the next few months after the GPS is out, just to make sure that it's we think it's giving effect to the GPS. So Arataki has got a 10-year lens over it at the moment. As I said before, it's based on the evidence and understanding of our understanding of the transport system. It reflects the work that we've already undertaken through business cases, and the work that our council partners have also been involved in too. And we see it as an input into the RLTP. So the important thing with this is that it's a starting point for a conversation. It's not a document that is supposed to represent the regional land transport plan. We still need to test the information we've got in there and make sure that we've got a regional lens over it. Anyway, just going through some of the material that's actually included in for Canterbury, we've got, we've identified the fact that there is population growth, particularly in Greater Christchurch. Of course, that's got impacts in terms of future urban reform, and also some of the mode shift opportunities that we're also seeing for Christchurch as well. We're also recognising the fact that there are safety issues in and around Christchurch and Canterbury generally. There are climate change issues, particularly around Christchurch, which is particularly low-lying, but also Kaikoura, and of course we've got the Alpine Fault. So you know, there's quite a few issues with climate change and also resilience. And of course, the key thing with Canterbury in particular, it is a major region for the South Island. It has got some good key hubs, so Port Lyttelton and also Prime Port. And of course, now we're developing the inland port from Christchurch. So, you know, we've really got to be thinking about the connections to the port and also to Timaru. You will also see on the right-hand side of the slide, in a very short summary, we have, at a very high level, we have identified what we think are key areas or key focus areas for Canterbury. And I've just briefly gone through those. At the back of the document, it does go into a little bit of detail about where we see those key focus areas actually being. And that really is a bit of a guide for us in terms of developing our tape, as well as a starting point for a conversation more generally with the region. So going backwards a little bit here, but I just thought it might be useful perhaps just to recap on the work that we have done for the South Island over the last 3 to 4 years. And we've really built up a picture through business cases, looking at the whole corridor from Picton through to Dunedin, and also looking within Christchurch and some key corridors within Christchurch, particularly to the port, and also State Highway 3 to the coast. It hasn't been done in isolation. We have been working particularly with our partners. I've got Ashburton's, Waimax, Selwyn, Christchurch City. There have been other business cases looking at other aspects of the transport network, and where we have been able to, we have been trying to make sure that those conversations are joined up. Is there anything you want to add, Jim, just before I carry on, or?
No, just, I mean,
just keep going.
Just to reinforce, yeah, well,
Steve,
no, the next...
Yeah.
Steve, it's Peter here, Steve. I'm just wondering, are you going to take questions at the end on this? Because there's some pretty interesting stuff that you're showing. So how do you...
Oh, look, I'm happy to have the conversation as we go through. And sorry, maybe I should have said that on the way through. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
So there's a lot of information in here, and I guess what I'm trying to do is just build up a bit of a story about how the thinking has evolved over the last few years, what is actually guiding us, particularly in terms of the national priorities, and how this is all sort of coming together for the next regional land transport plan. So yeah, look, maybe I'll stop here if you like, and perhaps just take some questions at this stage.
Yes, Dave. Oh, sorry. No. I'll go then. Yeah, Graham Smith, Mayor Mackenzie. Hey, I seem to have got a bit of talk back, but I'm not sure why. But the main route, Christchurch to Queenstown, seems to be a secondary route.
Christchurch to Queenstown is a secondary route when you compare it with State Highway 1, which we see as the primary route between Picton and Dunedin. But that doesn't mean to say it's not important, and we've identified it as an important key link through to Queenstown for freight and also for tourism.
Steve, it's Peter. I think this is a really great graphic in terms of, you know, I guess the Arataki story, how you see things, and the picture that actually, as you say, has been built up over the last 4 years, because sometimes we forget that all the work that's been done in the past. So I think it's good. Sam, have you got a question, Sam?
Yeah, it's really really interesting, the stuff, and the last graph too as well. Good to see, as has just been said, the history that's gone in here, because there's things that affect our roads in Canterbury that are on State Highway 1 but not in Canterbury. And I think of the downhill or uphill piece just south of Blenheim is probably the worst piece of road on State Highway 1. That isn't in Canterbury but does affect particularly freight on trucks in and out of the place, and it's going to cost a lot of money to fix, and looking at what freight options on rail are possible. You know, how do we advocate for things that are in other areas, in our neighbouring areas, to get, I suppose, a priority that ends up with an outcome that we want to see in Canterbury when it's beyond our borders. And so thank you for sharing that. And it's just, I guess, we point on State Highway 1. And on the slide before this, just like to note it mentions, I think, 22,000 workers commute into Christchurch daily. There'd be a similar number of workers commuting out of Christchurch daily into Selwyn and into Waimakariri, into Ashburton, into Huranui. And so a lot of the conversation tends to be around the pressure that gets put on Christchurch. And I just think there needs to be the balance of it's actually travellers working into district around Greater Christchurch that puts pressure on the system. I don't know, Dan, if you've got any comments on that, but it just stands out to me, and I think it's part of the conversation around the Greater Christchurch Partnership as well. Thank you.
So just a couple of things there, Sam, and they're good observations. I think you're referring to what's called Weld Pass on State Highway 1 as that tricky bit of road outside of Blenheim. And that has been in the #1 priority for the Top of the South Regional Transport Committees who have a combined document. In the past, the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee supported the upgrading of the Minga Bluff roadway into Arthur's Pass, which was actually West Coast supported that in the Canterbury region and was prepared to put some of their R funds into it. So it is possible for us in this document to refer to those interregional links and why they're important, and if there's parts of the broader South Island network that we believe is impacting on Canterbury and economic prosperity, etc., then there's no reason why we can't reference that in this front end of our document.
I guess I'd rather see the freight on a train rather than a truck going up and down those hills, So just thinking about how we talk about where that investment goes. But I do think that that piece of road, as you've highlighted, Jim, it's particularly dangerous in a car. It's probably one of the slowest pieces of road if you're for freight, and if you're in a car around trucks, which there are a lot coming out of Picton. So yeah, it's always stuck with me as a piece that needs upgrading and done across State Highway, but has never been done. So thank you for those comments.
Okay, we've got one from Mark Miller. Mark. Mark may have gone. Is there somebody else? There's someone in the bubble that I can't identify. So if you've got a question, just fire it out.
Yeah, sorry.
You are.
Sorry. I think.
Are you having trouble, Mark? Are you?
Going off. The mic keeps turning off. Not sure why.
Okay.
Yeah. Two key things. I've worked on the whole length of the South Island. Two key things is the access from Christchurch to the port, whether it's another tunnel. There's not a lot of alternatives. The rail is one, of course, but that's pretty well committed now. The other one, I work in Kaikoura now, and that main road comes through Kaikoura. I think it's time to seriously look at some sort of bypass for the freight. And there's some good options if we don't leave it too late, at least get it in the start of the planning. As we all know, the earthquake in Kaikoura cut the South Island off, so we're still pretty vulnerable with the rail and the freight coming down there without alternatives. The other thing that in previous work was Ashburton, which I know you're working on another bridge. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I see there's another question there, or another hand that I can see. Is there a question there, or someone just hasn't taken it down? I'm not sure. Otherwise, carry on, Steve.
Okay, I'm going to box on. So the other aspect of work that NZTA have also been working on too is the corridor management plan. So this is going down another level, but it's really looking, I don't know how clearly you can see that, there's a lot of information on there, but it's all, you know, it's looking at that length from Picton through to Littleton as an example. And it's actually saying, you know, in terms of travel reliability, which is the top line there, you know, where do we think it's okay? Where do we think there might be a bit of a problem? And you can see the red lines in there where we've identified, you know, whether it's safety or accessibility or travel time reliability, as to where there could be sections on that network that might take particular attention. So this really is about monitoring the network and making sure that, you know, from a one network road classification point of view, that it is performing to an adequate level of service. And it's also providing us with intel that, you know, if we know that there are sections of the network that are struggling, then, you know, if there is some money to be found, then, you know, that's where we need to be looking to prioritise. So
Mari's got a question, Steve.
Yep.
Mari.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't help but agree with some of the comments that was from the last slide about rail as a sound option as opposed to State Highway 1, particularly between going through our patch of Huranui into Kaikoura. But I can't quite read the performance corridor on the right hand side. It's a wee bit small on my my PowerPoint, but I wonder if there's a comment as far as providing a strong or a sound alternate to State Highway 1 with the inland road through the top of the Huranui district through into Kaikoura.
So
that's a good question, Murray. We've spent about $70 million on that road to strengthen it and make it more resilient, because we obviously lost State Highway 1 for a long period, but we've also, you know, improved it significantly because we recognise that we will lose that coastal road on and off for periods of time. And, you know, the earthquake taught us that that road wasn't really fit as an alternative for any length of time. We also spent quite a bit more money on the Lewis Pass through to Murchison, so that we've got much better resilience than we had pre-Kaikoura earthquake.
I guess as a representative of our district in the Huranui, the maintenance of that portion of the road that we were talking about through the end is, we're in negotiation, for the handing back of that maintenance. But for a small rural district like ours to maintain that to the level that does provide resilience or reliability when State Highway 1 is out is certainly a question on our minds for our small TA to cope with.
Understand.
Yeah, that's noted, Murray. Thanks for that.
Good-o, thank you.
Okay, shall I move on?
Yes, thanks, Steve.
Okay, so look, just drilling down again and following through on the work we've done previously. So this really is what you're seeing, what we've been doing in the last few years. Well, this NLTP is that we're continuing on the business cases that I was talking to you about before. So they in turn have spawned other business cases such as Bryme Street. So we're looking at access and through Bryme Street for freight and also connectivity across Bryme Street as well for local residents. PT Futures, which is looking at the public transport network over the next 10, 20 years and seeing what improvements we need to make. The growth of Rolleston and the upgrades that are actually needed in and around Rolleston, and Ashburton Second Bridge. So there's a couple of things I'd make there. One is some of those, well, most of those are being funded through the NLTF, but there's also other funding streams too. And, the Ashburton Second Bridge, for example, and others that you've highlighted earlier too, they're finding other funding streams. But I guess the advantage of working in this way is that we are identifying where there are key constraints on the network, where there are improvements, and then using that to actually look at where the opportunities might actually lie to see how we carry them forward. And below that, you can see that there are a number of things that you'll be very well aware of that we're actually working on. We've talked about Weka Pass. We've got the Christchurch motorways. There's some work that we're now doing out at West Melton, Tynwald. So all of that work that you see there that we're talking about now, that has come through from the studies and investigations that we've done 2 to 3 years ago, 3 to 4 years ago.
So Steve, we've got a few lining up here. I'll start with Sam because I can identify him.
Thanks. Just wondering the balance of where the local council has a say and a view about something compared to the region having a view and NZTA having a view about what needs to be done for the network. And because we've all got different bits of knowledge about what's local and also about what's national and efficient. And if I just think about Bryme Street for a minute, on the slides that you showed before, Steve, there can be large parts of a piece of a trip that are really efficient, but the whole trip can be really caught up in a couple of kilometres of really inefficient road. And for the South Island and freight, particularly getting to port, Bryme Street is one of those places where it just slows everything down. And I can understand the reluctance from people that live next door to Bryme Street to have major changes. But a couple of flyovers at Colombo Street and Selwyn Street would fix that pretty quick from a network point of view, but isn't necessarily what Christchurch City Council wants and what the people there want. So how does that play out around the regional voice coming in either to back up the local council voice or the NZTA network voice? Can you give us some heads up on how that functions?
I don't know whether Mike might be able to help me out on this, but I guess the way I see it personally is there are always competing interests. From an NZTA point of view, of course, as Jim pointed out earlier, we have our own direction in terms of what the government of the day are looking for. So whether it's accessibility or whether it's efficiency, or safety, we were always trying going to balance those as to work in a system. So this is where I guess you've really got to try and take, I think, a strategic approach to try and work out, using your understanding of how the system generally works as to where you would end up, putting your priorities. So for Bryant Street, for example, it does function both ways. You've got 40,000 vehicles, I believe, or 60,000 vehicles, going along Bryant Street, but you've got then about 170,000 vehicles going across Bryant Street. So that one is a really good example, actually, of trying to understand, I guess, the best way that you can actually get Bryant Street to work for all of those outcomes. I don't know, Mike, whether you've got or Jim, you might have a bit more to add to that.
I'll kick in first and then ask Mike to pick it up. But that's a good example, Sam, I think, of how the system works. Because if you go back a couple of regional transport plans, you'll find reference to Bryant Street being a critical freight corridor and a key to the growth of the Canterbury Plains, irrigation coming on, bringing more product, etc., etc. So in order to deal with that complexity that Steve has described, we've been working with Christchurch City on a joint business case, which has been over many years. It's involved a number of iterations. It's tried to now come up with a scheme which can try and do the best with those competing objectives and provide more certainty for freight and high passenger transport occupant vehicles in the future. So that project's still got another couple of years before there is a final solution, but its strategic importance of the route and the need to work together and get sufficient funding to do the business cases has been in the previous regional transport plans, and that's why it's a good example of how, for something strategic, if there's no investigation money, we can't even, if you like, get a program on the table which is potentially investable. So, Mike, do you want to say something? Because I know you were involved in this some time ago. That's Mike Blyleven.
Yes, thank you, Jim, and hello, everyone. As for things as complex as Broa, which is in the middle of a very complex urban system, so it's not just about transport in this context, it's also that whole built environment and the environment that you're passing through. So the process of the business case looks at a whole myriad of options in terms of how you might address your problems, how you can achieve those investment objectives, and those have been developed in collaboration, with the partners. But as we go through and assess those options, there is a multi-criteria lens that needs to go across it, that needs to look at the impacts on the adjacent neighbours and the environment, as well as achieving your objectives. And that's where we get these differing perspectives. And that's the tricky part of how do we actually choose the appropriate solution. And for Bryant Street, that's a process that the team are, as we speak, in the process of weighing those things up to work out what is the best way to go forward.
Hey, thanks for that, Mike and Jim, and also for your question, Sam. And I think we've got Dan now. You've got a question, Dan?
Yes, it's probably coming up on a future slide, but I was just double checking the wooden corridor safety improvements and bypass. Well, the bypass probably won't mention because it unfortunately hasn't made the plan yet. Hoping it will. But is that covered under safety improvements? I saw it in the document. It was.
Jim, Jim, are you going to talk to that?
Well, there's two legs to that one, and again, Michael knows a lot about this. There's the strategic term decision, and we've got a designation and a consent to build the bypass. So it's a question of when, and it's not a question of if, and that's going to depend on safety and traffic volumes and the overall investment priorities nationally. In the short term, we can't do nothing, so we have been doing corridor study works through the main street, and there'll be some improvements coming up there to provide a better level of safety for the residents and school children in the interim. But you would expect to find some of that in this plan, both in the strategic longer term direction and also somewhere buried in NZTA's tape, you would expect to find something.
So would I see that under safety improvements, Jim? Is that where it would be mentioned?
It's primarily, but gentlemen, my colleagues, have you got another view? You probably do.
Well, no, Wood End in particular, the corridor safety improvements, that's exactly been spawned from that. But it's a little bit different from some of the rural sections where we've been experiencing a high occurrence of deaths and serious injuries. The issue for Wood End is more about that safe community access, and this is where you look at the words in the GPS about improving travel options.
I'm still on RTC.
This is what we're trying to
I'll bring you back.
achieve
Can I ring you back?
in the short term, is to enable those children to get across the road safely to school and improve that community connectivity. So we're working actively with the Waimak district officers to progress that study, as we speak.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back to Steve, are we?
I'll carry on. I haven't heard anything else. So this is what I think where we're getting to now. So with all that we've talked about previously and the description that we gave earlier about the investment proposal, this is where it all really comes together. So the Transport Agency's investment proposal, it's going to contain all of NZTA's activities that's seeking funding through the NLTF. So it includes the national programs and it will also include the state highway component of the program. And it's the state highway component. There's probably some other components as well that have a regional focus that we need to be bringing together to make up the regional program. Now, our investment proposal is going to be heavily influenced through the GPS priorities because, as Jim said earlier, we have to give effect to the GPS, which is quite a high bar that we need to show. We've also got Aotearoa's 10-year view. So if you read Aotearoa, it will give you at least a bit of an indication at this stage as to where we think our investment might be heading for Canterbury. It is still high level, and it's we're going to be trying to be providing some better clarity over the next few months as we sort of work through it. But the starting point for this really is the work that we have done previously. So it's the business case programs that we have been talking about for some time, and it's the programs that we're currently working on at the moment. So there are the obvious ones around PT, around safety, which of course the GPS is very much focused on, and around mode share. And also around freight. Now, with all of that, of course, funding for the TAPE is going to be prioritised like any other funding. We're not special in any particular way. We have to go through the same hoops as anyone else in terms of proving that the projects that we're putting up are value for money. They do meet the criteria in terms of our investment framework. And of course, they fit within the funding levels which are set by the government.
Okay, Steve. Steve, can I just check where you are with this process in terms of this item? Are you nearly at the end, or you've got a bit to go?
So, oh, sorry, are you talking about the this presentation, or are you talking about the tape? This is the the presentation. This is the last slide.
Cool,
So
thank you.
Bringing it all together. But you have reminded me, actually, in terms of the tape, we are partway through that particular process at the moment. Because of COVID and because of the stimulus package, and obviously because of a bit of uncertainty at the moment, we are actually delaying bringing the tape out. But what we are very keen on is making sure that we continue to engage with RTCs where we can, and also with officers where we can, to make sure that there is no surprises when the tape does come out. It'll be August, it could even be as late as early September. So we want to make sure that we continue that conversation, and we're also working very closely with the officers as we build both the local program as well as the TAPE program for the region. So anyway, for this last slide, it's putting it all together. So we have got a strategic approach. We're not just pulling projects out of the air. They have been developed over a period of time. We are certainly taking a systems approach to how where we want to invest in the network. We are very much looking at the South Island as part of New Zealand, obviously. And you know, the team within NZTA, we're doing sort of more and more work looking at where Canterbury fits with the rest of the South Island as well. So we're trying to take a very broad approach. We're also trying to be very focused in terms of where we think the investment needs to go into the network. Arataki builds on earlier strategies, as I said before, and I would like to think that when you do read through Arataki, it actually does reflect some of the thinking that's coming through from the region. I've also said that we have to give effect to the GPS, so it is a different test to developing a regional land transport program, and the funding pool is constrained. And of course, with COVID at the moment, there are all sorts of tensions that we're actually having to play with, you know, with the NLTF. And the RTC through the RLTP, we see that as a key role actually to continue to advocate for projects as it sees its priorities. So, you know, the NZTA through Arataki is setting out as a starting point a conversation to have with RLTPs, but at the end of the day, the RLTP needs to reflect the regional view. And that's
Steve,
it.
Yes, Steve. Hey, Steve, thank you very much. This has been pretty enlightening, and there's been some good stuff in there. So I'm glad that we've taken the time to go through this a bit more carefully than what we would have. So are there any questions or comments to Steve before we close this off?
There's Neil here. I haven't got a question. Could that PowerPoint presentation be given to us all, emailed to us, please?
Sure.
Most definitely.
Great.
So thanks, Steve. Thanks for that. And thanks, Jim, and also Michael for your inputs there. So if we can just move to the recommendation on page 23, I think it is, that the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee one notes the update from Waka Kotahi on Arataki and Transport Agency investment plan. So have I got a mover for that? Thanks, Dan.
Happy to move, Sam.
Thanks, Mari. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks very much. Now we've got, now we're moving on to 6.4, which is you, Jim, I think. It's just a standing update, but a pretty busy one when I read the report in terms of the stuff that you have in there. So I think this will be quite topical also. I note that we've got a finish time of 6 o'clock. I'm not thinking that we need to go that far, but the last item took 35 to 40 minutes, so we'll see how we go.
Well, I think with this one, Peter, we'll just take the report as read and take questions, because quite a few of the matters that we dealt with in the previous presentation are covered in here. There are one or two things like the Accessible Streets program and so on that people may want to find out a bit more, but Brougham Street's there. I guess the northern and southern motorways, I'll just highlight one thing there. The northern motorway's got extra people on it, so that's the arterial from Waimakariri into Cranford Street. The pre-COVID that was due to be opened end of the year, and it's still on track. Whereas the southern motorway was due to have quite a bit of sealing done during the 2-month period we've all been sort of locked down. So unfortunately, when you lose the significant chunk of your summer sealing season, you simply can't finish. We were due to finish that middle of this year, so that's going to not be available till the end of the year. So that has quite a big knock-on effect, and that's one of the issues across all of our sites. We've got 40-odd large construction sites in New Zealand, and all of them have been affected differently by the lockdown. But in any event, from Canterbury's point of view, we're trying to get 2 lanes heading north. The 2 lanes that are heading north will become the north-south route in the future, so it will still be a better level of service than the Rolleston people have had for a while. The only other comment I'd make was PT Futures. There's some interesting commentary in the paper today, I think, from committee members in Greater Christchurch. We are looking with our partners at how the current services can be improved, but also in the future, is there a case for a mass rapid transit system, and where would it be and what form would it take? And that's where you move lots of people down a corridor. For those systems to work, wherever your big bus station is or your big train station, you need highly intensive land use around it to give you the critical mass to fill up the trains or the buses or whatever form it takes. So that piece of work is kicking off, will be quite important longer term for the strategic direction of the urban area of Greater Christchurch. And I think pretty well everything else we've covered in the previous conversation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. Listen, I think that GCP PT Futures deal is going to be reasonable, and I see that we've got a reasonable report coming to the next RTC, and we've got two mayors that are sitting at the table at the moment, Mayor Dan and Mayor Sam, that are heavily involved in that. And I think that if there's nothing more to say than that, I think the others might be interested in terms of a more detailed look at that at our next meeting. My question, Jim, is regarding the GPS and where we find ourselves at the moment. Do you think that focus will be sustained in terms of where we are with that, or do you think there might be some opportunity for the government to refocus the GPS?
Short answer is I don't know. That's a matter which the Minister of Transport and advisors will be considering based on submissions and the environment, the operating environment that we're in. I think at a very high level, if you take those strategic objectives we showed you in Steve's presentation, I don't think they'll shift. It's really the emphasis and the activity classes will depend on, I guess, where we are, what the funding is looking like, and what and how those priorities would link to decisions already made around economic stimulus. But those are matter for the government and cabinet. We'll all hear in due course.
Okay, other comments or questions for Jim regarding his report?
Yeah, Jim, it's Craig Rowley here. Can I just ask one in relation to the speed reviews? Is when are we likely to get something on that? Like, we went out to consultation for the Glenavy area in November last year, and obviously I'm getting a bit of kickback from the community down there.
Yes. I hope by the next RTC I can give you more joy on that. We have, as myself and my colleagues have got similar situations from South Island, and we are trying to find out where those decisions are. I'll be able to inform you in the next meeting.
All right, thank you.
Accessible streets, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
You got anything to say about that in terms of where we've landed with that in terms of submissions? Do you know yet?
No, I don't. The money isn't huge, but it's a good idea. You're talking about the rule change.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
no. So I don't know when that's likely to be passed, but I guess the rule change is trying to recognise what's happened in terms of people using footpaths for cycling and walking, as well as e-scooters and the like. So, but yeah, I'll see if we can have more clarity for you at the next meeting on the time frame.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, and thanks, Jim, for the report. Just wondering around speed limits, as it was mentioned before, particularly on gravel roads and rural roads, and there's been some discussion around having a consistent nationwide change to 80 k's or something lower than 100 k's. Rather than just straight out of, like someone making its own decision, or Ashburton making its own decision, or even Canterbury making its own decision, doesn't make sense around those sorts of limits, which are better off with national consistency. Has there been any further discussion on that? And We haven't had a discussion through the RTC as to whether or not that's even supported by the region. How might that occur, and what's the best avenue there?
Yeah, good question. There's a speed management guide which has looked at every road in New Zealand using a series of parameters or factors, and that guide recommends, if you like, maximum speeds for different parts of the network, and your staff would have that, so they would know what it's suggesting for the shingle roads within, say, Selwyn or Waimak or Hiranui and so on. So, because again, there's some high quality shingle roads, which 80Ks would be okay, but there's other ones which it wouldn't be. So I think there hasn't been a lot of, there's no knowledge, I'm not aware of any push to have a blanket starting point reduced, but I am aware that we're encouraging local authorities to use that tool, assess your networks, and start a process with your own community to potentially drop speeds to something more appropriate.
I guess when it's been brought up locally, there is support for it in Selwyn, but you've got to start thinking about road signs and putting things up, and having 80K signs across 1,000 kilometres of network of gravel roads just in one district is a lot of work compared to just having a consistent national standard for gravel roads that would have a peak somewhere at somewhere at 80 rather than 100 to begin with. So yeah, we do have that here. I'm just wondering whether there could be a Canterbury or indeed a national move on that.
I'll follow that up and see if I can bring some better intelligence.
You make a good point, Sam. So we'll see.
But I can assure you that even though a lot of people can never drive at 100 on those roads, whenever you suggest dropping speeds, you may not want the result. To the town hall.
You can do 110 around some corners. You don't have to go straight ahead either. Right, sideways works quite well.
Okay. I see we're losing a few participants out the far end. So if there's nothing more for Jim, I think we might just shift on through this. I thought that, but as you said, Jim, I think we had a reasonable discussion under Steve's heading. So I think we've done pretty well, really, in terms of the stuff. And I think everyone's had a fair opportunity to interact. So if I could just...
Oh, sorry, Steve Hicks here. Just very quickly, there is a PowerPoint presentation too. I don't know whether that's been received, but if it hasn't, I think we should get that circulated, because it just provides just a little bit more information based on the report we've provided.
Yeah, thanks for that.
You'll get 2 PowerPoints, in other words.
Thank you. No, it's good stuff. I think it's well worth receiving those to background some of the conversation that we've had. Sam, did you have something else you wanted to say? Your hand is in the air. Cool, that's great. Listen, I think we'll move on then to the recommendation on page 24. It reads that the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee notes the update from Waka Kotahi. So somebody like to move that. Thank you, Dan. Seconder. Thank you, Sam. All those in favour? Carries. Thank you. The next 3 items that we have are in the custody of Ben Wong, but they are, so the first one, 6.5, is a variation to NLTP. We're taking the paper as read unless somebody wants to discuss it.
Show them that one. You put it through. What a great head to head. Well played, Tom.
What's the question?
How'd you feel?
There's no hands.
Relatively easy, though, in the end.
Yeah, some of the sort of bits I don't know, but I can sometimes work it out.
Oh, good.
Complete guess.
I'm not sure what that's all about. Let's try and work around that. So there's nobody with their hand up. So the recommendation on page 31 is that the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee notes the Kaikoura District Council's request that the New Zealand Transport Agency vary the National Land Transport Program to take account of revised emergency works funding estimated at a total value of 30.9 million. So we need a mover for that motion, please. Murray, you happy? Okay, and Graham.
Yep.
Seconded that. All those in favour? All those in favour? Aye. All those against? No. Thank you. Carried. So item 6.6 is the scorecard development updates, and the paper again is to be taken as read, but Ben is here if you've got a question around that. The scorecard was provided in the papers. There's no comment.
I guess it's just on public transport boardings. I understand they're sitting in Greater Christchurch at 45% of May last year. So, you know, post-COVID, it is coming back, but it's still going to take a while before people have whether the buses have got the capacity and people are comfortable to use them.
Can I just comment on that, Jim? Look, we're mildly surprised at how well we are doing actually under the restrictions that we have. And more than mildly surprised at the uptake of My Way in Timaru beyond demand. And so, you know, that is going really, really well. And there's an intense amount of interest in that. So if anyone gets an opportunity to have a look at that, they should. And if they want to have a look at it, they should contact us. So, yeah, it's a good opportunity there. Okay, everyone happy with that? So the recommendation is on page 33 that the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee, 1, note the quarterly monitoring and progress report attached to this report, and 2, note that Environment Canterbury is currently reviewing the approach to monitoring and will align the new approach with the Ministry of Transport Outcomes Framework. So I'm going to pick a mover. So I'll pick you, Sam, and I'll pick you, Dan, to second that if you're happy. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, carried. And moving to 6.7 Regional Road Safety Working Group and Transport Officers Group update. Again, Ben is here if we need to question any questions around that, but we're taking this as read unless anybody wants it discussed. I don't think anyone wants it discussed. So the recommendation is on page 38 that the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee receives the Regional Road Safety Working Group and Transport Officers Group report. Have a mover, please. Thank you, Murray. A seconder.
Yep.
Thank you, Sam. All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against? Carried. Hey, thank you very much. So we're at 7, which is extraordinary and urgent business, and we haven't got any that I'm aware of. Then we're at item 8, which is general business, and I think we're going to you, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been advised that by staff that to bring forward a position on Flaxton Road, Fernside Road intersection, and we've been in discussions with the NZTA about how this might be funded. We've been advised that any change in funding would need a variation for the regional land transport at the RLTP. So what we're doing here is to signalling our intention to bring forward a proposed change to the RTC for safety improvements at that particular intersection. It's been delayed in its request due to the COVID-19, and a formal request is proposed to be tabled in August. It was advised that we should raise this today, and we'd appreciate receiving, I guess, sentiment from those on board that they would, of whether or not you would support this variation, bearing in mind that we will bring a paper to this formally at the August, and table that in August. Fernside Flaxton Road's a fairly major intersection in our district that's been identified as needing improvement. All the design work's been done. We've undertaken consultation with the community. We're now ready to proceed with this, and we need funding to make this work. I understand our project budget's around 1.6 million for this project. So I've got both Joanne and Jared from the council on board. Is there anything else that you think should be added, you two? They're very silent, so they obviously agree with everything I've said. That's excellent.
Yeah, sorry, Dan, it's Jared here. Look, yeah, I think you covered things fairly well. It is a significant safety concern for us. This intersection has become extremely busy. It's pretty much the second route into Rangiora, becoming almost as busy as Lineside Road, which probably most of you know. we had a pretty nasty accident with a motorcyclist earlier in the year, and it really does stick out for us as a big concern, this intersection. It has got an issue with the geometry, so that cars, there's a lot of traffic makes a left-hand turn, and cars waiting at the top of the T to make a turn, they can't see the oncoming vehicles. So yeah, we've certainly prioritised and we'd be very happy if the support.
Murray.
Oh, as a neighbour to the Waimaka area, I know that road and I know that intersection well, and I would absolutely support Dan's approach for a variation with this proposal. It has been historically had a number of accidents there, and I think this would be there is some real wisdom in it. So good on you, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Murray.
Good. Thank you for that. Sorry, Jim. Go.
Yeah, it's just a process question. If it's a $1.6 million job, does that trigger the significance policy to require it to be included in the RTC, or could it be done through a low cost, low risk program? Maybe Jared would comment on that.
Joanne, if you're there, it'd be good. I had understood that we had originally anticipated promoting it through the low cost, low risk projects. So hopefully Joanne can shed a bit more light.
Apologies, I can provide some further advice there. So my understanding is under the low cost, low risk program, our cap for that is $1 million. So this would sit just outside of that. And we have been in discussions with Janine in terms of the Safe Network program and Andrew Washington on this project. And this is the suggested approach that we have discussed with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Look, listen, thank you for that. There's obviously nothing in terms of what we can do about this. There's no resolution, decision or recommendation can be made except to refer to a subsequent meeting for further discussion. I think there is an appetite for that. So Dan, if you're happy with that, that's what we will do with this item.
Thank you, and I appreciate the sentiments expressed by colleagues. Thank you.
So is there any further business that we have before us? If not, thank you for your brevity. We're half an hour early almost. So I would just note that the next meeting is on the 20th of August this year, and hopefully we'll see each other in person. So thank you very much for putting up with all the clunkiness, and have a good evening.